Welcome to Out Motorsports, the channel for cars as you are. My name is Jake, and this is the 2022 Audi S5 Sportback. This is the sibling to the Audi A4 sedan, and the Sportback adds a whole different element of both style and practicality. We'll get into that in just a second because the Sportback can be applied whether you have an A5, an S5, or an RS5. However, the S5 is what we have here, so let's talk about what makes the S5 different from a regular A5, where it stacks up in the lineup, what the big deal is with all the performance of the S5 Sportback, and then we'll get behind the wheel and see how it is to drive. So starting off, what is powering the 2022 Audi S5 Sportback? Every Audi S5 Sportback has the same engine up front, and that is going to be a 3-liter turbocharged V6 compared to a 2-liter turbocharged 4 in the Audi A5 Sportback. It is a single turbo twin scroll V6, 3 liters. It makes 349 horsepower and 369 pound-feet of torque. Fairly healthy for a car like this. Audi claims that is good for a 0 to 60 run of 4.5 seconds, which of course only matters so much. That is paired to an 8-speed torque converter automatic transmission. There is no manual transmission option here, and it is paired to standard Quattro all-wheel drive. That is kind of Audi's hallmark at this point, and it is standard here on the S5 to help you put power down to all 4 wheels. So moving to the back of the Audi S5 Sportback, what's the whole deal with the Sportback bit? Why would I buy this over an S4 sedan? Well, if you pop the back open, you can see exactly why, and that is because this is a liftback, if you will. It's basically a big hatchback that looks kind of like a sedan, and this is a really great body style because you get all the benefits of a sedan where everything rides lower, you've got lower center of gravity. However, you've got a much more practical opening back here where you can slide in furniture, bicycles, anything large. You could fit back here. Of course, the back seats fold down. If you value fun to drive over everything, but you need some practicality, something like this could be a very good option for you. Now, that's it for the Sportback bit, but there's some other important things that we need to talk about back here as well. One of which is the suspension. Now that is different on this example test car I've got here because this car has the S Sport package, which is $2,500. Sounds like a lot, but if you're buying a $55,000 Audi, might be worth doing. The S Sport package gives you these adaptive dampers. So where you would normally have a regular shock that has one valving rate, one damping rate, these have adaptive dampers with the S Sport package. So based on your drive modes, the shocks will be firmer or softer based on what you've chosen. So you've got a couple different options based on the road conditions and how you're driving the car. Talk more about how that all works in the driving segment here in just a second. The other big thing that is important that comes with the S Sport package is what Audi calls the S Sport rear differential. And they don't really tell you what that does necessarily, but the best part about the S Sport rear differential is that it can move power left to right up to 100% of the power that is at the back axle. So you're not gonna have all of the engine's power at the rear axle with Quattro, but of the power that comes back here, it is basically a torque vectoring differential. Again, we'll talk about how it feels behind the wheel in just a second. The third thing that you get with the S Sport package is perhaps the most important. It's the street cred. You have red painted brake calipers. Beyond that, that's what you get with the S Sport package. Like I said, $2,500 on top of the regular Audi S5 Sportback. I think it's worth having because the S5 is the performance-ish version of the A5 Sportback. There is, of course, the RS5 Sportback if this whole thing sounds great to you, but you want a little more power than 349 can provide. So driving the 2022 Audi S5 Sportback, before we get out to the good roads, let's talk about a couple things going on in the cabin here as far as things you can change. So first of all, I mentioned there are drive modes. Audi calls it Drive Select. It's just an up and down arrow button here on the center stack. And you have 2 options. You have Comfort and you have Dynamic. And then you've got an individual setting. There's also an auto that tries to figure things out as you're going through it all. Usually I tend to leave those auto settings off because I find that I'd rather tell the car what I'm doing and what road I'm on more than anything. But Dynamic is going to be your sportier setting for your twisty roads, your back roads, your autocrosses, your track days, whatever. And then there's Comfort for your day-to-day highway cruising and your normal mode basically. Individual lets you customize a few things as far as, they call it the drive experience, whether you want balance or sport, your suspension settings, your steering settings, and your engine sound. How much noise is piped into the cabin, more or less. But let's get this back into Dynamic. We are there. The other thing we can do is with the shifter here. So this is, like I said, 8-speed torque converter automatic. When you put it into drive, you are in drive. You also can click it back to S for sport, and then you can slide it over to the right, and it gives you manual control. You've got downshift, upshift right here, or you've got it paddles on the steering wheel. I'm going to click it into sport for the time being, and let's hit some back roads. So it's very important to mention, even if you put the car in dynamic mode for the drive select, I really have to emphasize, put the transmission in S for sport. If you leave it in drive, it feels very delayed as far as your inputs versus what the car does. It of course will hold gears longer in sport mode, but it also seems to amp up the throttle response a good bit, and amp up how quick the downshifts will come if you're looking to pull out and pass someone or something like that. Obviously, if you want to keep power mid-corner, it's a little bit different experience. Sport is good for that too, or you can pop it to manual and do your own thing with the paddle shifters. But even driving around in normal scenarios like cruising on the highway where I want the whole car in comfort mode, I find I like things in sport a little bit more, because pulling out to pass or something, it's just a little off in drive, to where I find myself with my foot in the carpet muttering, please just go and do something, and it doesn't quite do it as quick as I would prefer. Just a small quibble. I'm sure in day-to-day driving, in most scenarios, most people doing most things wouldn't necessarily notice or care. And so as we get into some twisty bits of these roads, beyond straight line performance, front-wheel drive based all-wheel drive systems like Quattro can feel a little, understeery, nose heavy, whatever you want to call it. This, I think, feels pretty good. It does like to have you, if you brush the brakes, it will help set the nose of the car just a bit through a corner. And then you've got that sport differential that helps you power out of the corner more than anything, as far as putting some power to the rear to help prevent that understeer and help actually get the car to rotate and keep going out of the turn. Steering, even in the dynamic setting, is fairly light. I think it's accurate enough, and I think it's got decent feel to it. It is most notable on roads where the surface is not so great, how much it will talk to you in dynamic mode, and it does feel pretty good to me. I think I like the steering in this car for the most part, but like I said, it's a little light for my preference. As we accelerate yet again, it's always worth talking about stopping, and brakes are a pretty strong suit of this car. It's got 13.8-inch front rotors, and those are upsized over a regular A5 Sportback, and they provide pretty good confidence on back roads, even if you need to, stop really suddenly for somebody. I had someone earlier just came up on them when they were backing up in the middle of the road. So if you need to really clamp down on something, they feel pretty good even when they're cold. Initial bite of the pedal is nice and balanced, and as you go through the pedal travel, again, nice and balanced there. And it's also worth mentioning, I just kind of like how the V6 sounds. Obviously, some of that is piped in, some of that is actual exhaust sound. It sounds really good outside the car, and that is something you won't get with a Turbo 4. Obviously, that's not what you're getting in the S5 either way, but it's a nice sound. And Audi rates this at 30 miles per gallon highway, which I have found fairly easy to achieve. I took this to and from Philadelphia and was able to get it to read about 29.7, 29.8 on the dash. So even if you consider that, perhaps a little off, still read very close to what they rate it for, which I think is great for a car that makes this much power and, is as fun to drive as this is. Now, as we go through a few more corners here, again, nice and easy. It really wants to almost oversteer versus plowing forward, which is it's very nicely set up for being, how Quattro is. It's a front-biased all-wheel drive system at its core. I really like it. Easy to control. That's just the whole theme of this car. This is not the sharpest version of this chassis. If you want that, it's going to be the RS5. But I think for most people, this feels nice and balanced. It's a good size, it's easy to drive somewhat quickly, it is willing to get down and party, but if you want just something that you can put in drive and cruise on the interstate, it is actually very comfortable there. I will say this is one of the cars that I've driven where having the adaptive dampers and actually using the drive mode settings makes a big difference. If you have this car in dynamic mode on the interstate, I was on I-95 for a large majority of the weekend, and having the car in dynamic on the interstate was not fun. It wants to really hop around and follow all the imperfections in the road. It is, you know, the dynamic mode for the dampers and everything is really meant for good roads like these back roads where they're, you know, nice and paved well and maintained. That's where this is going to come into its own, in that sportier suspension mode. With everything in dynamic on the highway on really lousy roads was not impressive. Check your drive modes, and when I put it back into comfort, it was a whole new car. It was much more relaxing, much easier to drive and enjoy just in a straight line at 70 miles an hour on the interstate. And then of course, with interstate driving, there are two things worth mentioning that come with this car having the Prestige package, which is about an $8,000 upcharge over the most basic S5 Sportback. And it makes the car kind of expensive. This one comes in right around $70,000, but two options that they give you that are part of that Prestige pack, one of which is just your lane keep assist, which is nice to have. The other is adaptive cruise control with traffic jam assist, which I loved using it on 95 on the way up to Philadelphia from DC on a Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. It was the perfect time to try it out. It works pretty well. It's basically just low-speed adaptive cruise control, but it gives you stop and go with minimal input and intervention from the driver, which is pretty sweet if you're dealing with a lot of traffic. You still have to have your hands on the wheel. You still need to pay attention to the road. There's no self-driving cars on sale today, but nice to have it. As far as the rest of the Prestige package, you have to decide if the rest of it is worth it to you or not. It's a lot of nice to haves, a lot of luxuries that certainly make this car feel very luxurious, very nice. But one question that several of you posed on Instagram was, this is a $70,000 S5. Why wouldn't I spend $76,000 and get an RS5 that makes 440 some horsepower over this 349? So very valid question. Again, you have to decide what's right for you, compare the two. These S5 Sportbacks start at 55 grand. So this one has a ton of options on it. I think I would definitely want the Sport package to get the differential and the shocks because they really make it turn nicely, handle nicely. It's kind of a nice, I wouldn't say Jekyll and Hyde because that implies that it's a little more aggressive than it can be in the sport mode, but it's definitely a dual personality car, especially with the suspension. That's definitely worth it. Obviously the black optics package, if you want that, it's another $1,500 bucks, but $2,500 for the sport package, yes, worth having. Everything else that this particular car has to bring it to 70 grand, do your own looking, look on the build tool online, see what you think is worth it or not. All right, and that is it for this review of the 2022 Audi S5 Sportback in this beautiful turbo blue. Like I said earlier, please don't buy this car in gray. It would be doing a disservice to the fabulous paint color that is available here in turbo blue. That is all for this episode. Thank you so much for coming along. As always, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe right here on YouTube. You can also find us on other social media at Out Motorsports on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and sometimes TikTok, but I don't know what I'm doing with it, but we're over there. And if you'd like to join a community of LGBT automotive enthusiasts and amateur motorsports competitors, please head over to outmotorsports.com. We have a whole community over there, and we would love to get to know you. Till next time, please stay safe, be well, and we'll see you for the next one.